when it comes to layering, there are the standards. Let's say I have a snare drum, right? Let's just grab a snare drum. Layering level 1, as I call it. Awesome, awesome. I actually like that one because it's missing stuff, but I like its tone. Yeah, I like this snare. Has a lot of character to it. Maybe remove some of that noise. Yeah, that's all I really want from this. Now, why would we layer? Well, let's look at the snare. It mostly exists right here at around 200 hertz, right around here, right around 2.5K. There's this sharp roll off right here that maybe I don't want. Maybe I don't want that. I like this point right here. I like that tone, but it's not quite as bright as I might like. And sure, I could go hunting for another sample that has that brightness, but there's other things we could do. And also, if I just look at the dynamics of this, it doesn't really have a transient per se. So much so that I kind of want to fade in this stuff right here, which makes it even more kind of flammy. But what it means is we're missing a transient. So now I'm going to layer in 2 different sounds that provide for me that high end and that transient. First things first, I'm going to go to my sample pack from last year. I have a snare in mind that I want to use specifically for this. I think it's this one. There it is. I like that snare just because it has a fair bit of noise to it. So it'll kind of help fill in the noise here, but also just has like this super clearly defined transient. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to fade this out because I don't really want that to be my noise, but I do want a little bit of it. So now, way more punchy, right? Right at the start. I actually need this to be a bit softer. So without it, with, now without the main layer. So this adds a lot of the body, a lot of the tone, and it makes it feel a little bit more live, right? Now I want to add in another layer that's going to be a little bit more noisy. So let's actually, you know what? Let's actually just get white noise. And let's blend this together. That's actually totally fine. So let's take this right here. I'm going to reverse this. And we're going to fade this out, essentially, right here. Maybe not this one. I want something with a little bit more noise to it. That's actually perfect. So let's take this. Let's sculpt this to be our tail. And the idea is, as you can see, like for layer 1 of layering, pun not intended there, you can start to see the division of elements. You can see this comes up as this comes down. You can see as these come down, this fades in. So it's not so much that you have these 2 sounds stacked on top of each other, but it's also that you are like looking for only the parts from these sounds that you want or need. So now, without this noise, now with it. Adjust the volumes a little bit. Now think about where we started, right? We started with this. And we ended with this. Something that has a lot more character to it, a lot more depth to it, and it's a little bit more ours, so to speak. It's less of this sample pack snare. So if you are using a lot of samples in your production, I would actually recommend you start moving into, at the very least, starting to layer your sounds, because then you're not using something that everyone else has used. Because I'm sure there's other people who have bought this Ricky Remedy sample pack. I'm sure there's other people who have used this exact snare in a tune. And I'm sure there's even more people who have used it without processing it, or without layering it, or without doing anything to it. Just, let's mix that in. Okay, we've got our snare. Totally acceptable. Totally acceptable. But now I have something that feels more like my own sound. I can go in, I can then start doing stuff like processing this together, or recording it and bouncing it and playing with it elsewhere. But I would consider that sort of stage one when it comes to layering. But we can break this down and really explain to ourselves, at least, why this matters, right? Because these are not the same sound. They are the same thing. They're all meant to be technically a snare, apart from this. But this is a snare, and this is a snare. But they sound drastically different to each other, despite fulfilling the same role. So when you're layering, that's going to be one of the first things that you should be looking for, in my opinion. A lot of different sounds so that they fill up an overall frequency range. Like, as I mute these, I want you to keep your eye on the bottom of the screen. Oops. Just to see what happens as I mute and unmute the layers of this. Oops. Every time I remove something, there is a drastic change in the sound. Now, if you don't know how far to go with this, that's fine. I recommend that you just go in and just add in a bunch of things that sound cool. Focus just on things that sound cool, not necessarily different. Layer them up together, and then do what I just did. Start muting and unmuting a single layer at a time, sometimes 2 layers at a time. Ask yourself, does the sound intrinsically change when I remove this element? If it changes what it is for the sound to be this sound, I can't get rid of it. But if it doesn't really seem to be making a difference whether or not it's there, or if it really just seems to be changing it without removing what it is to be that sound, you can probably get rid of it. And as far as the limit, I would say it really depends on where in the sound, because you're talking specifically about drums or plucks, and what you're referring to there is elements with transient. Now, let's zoom in right here. Notice, this is the only sound that has volume at the very beginning. This is fading in, this is fading in. The transient is almost completely isolated in this sound. Because of that, I can get away with a little bit more layering than I might have if I had this all the way out, so that the transients are smearing each other or dealing with each other in some way. I haven't found a strict number limit, but it's mostly like, how much information do I have per frequency band? This sound is mostly 200 and 2K. This sound, I mean, the part that I really care about is probably only the stuff over 1K, so I could even go in and high pass this out. and it'd probably sound better. Yeah, it actually sounds a little bit better without that, because now this is not taking up all this frequency range for the snare and this snare, because this snare hits at around the same point, but it's not existing at the same time. So like I could even theoretically go in and low pass this. I kind of like it how it was. But, you know, by cleaning up these sounds, I could even go ahead, and since this doesn't even really need all this stuff up here, I could even, see, not doing anything to the sound really either way. Maybe moving a little bit of brightness. We could probably add a little bit of a Q boost here. Whoops. To this one. Make that tone a little bit longer. Yeah. That's good. It's reinforcing that, so it's kind of like extending this to bleed it into here to make it feel more like one instrument. That's another part of the process, or processing at least. And with all of these layering ideas or combining sounds together in terms of what's going on, processing is going to be involved, but processing can also be its own layering technique. But now, again, if we go back to that very first snare we started with, I have something that to me sounds way more unique. I kind of like it. I think it sounds pretty cool. I think it has a nice texture to it. I might want to turn this down a little bit because I can see I'm clipping. I might even be able to get away with a little bit of soft clipping here. But that's not a bad snare to me. I think that's a snare I could use in a song. I might even actually just go ahead and render this out before I forget. The next step would be orchestration, which to me is slightly different than layering, but is its own thing. And I'm going to do that with a pad, not a pluck, but it'll be close to kind of what you're thinking about, Robin. And I'm just going to have a simple chord progression playing through multiple synths, essentially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's grab Diva, because I like the Diva stock patch. And let's just do like, that's our chord progression, right? Nice and clean, nice and simple. Just four chords doing their business. You know, as you do. As you do. And let's just go ahead and, I don't really care about the specific placement, but, you know, chord progression. Gather this out a little bit. But orchestration is going to be slightly different from layering, because I'm going to duplicate this patch a couple times. And now I'm going to orchestrate the layers. On this top layer, I'm going to remove all but the bottom two notes. On this one, I'm going to remove the top note and the bottom two notes. Every single pair. And then for this one, I'm going to remove all but the bottom two notes. It's going to sound the same to start as we had before with the full chord. Let me actually pull this back real quick and then duplicate that just so I have the full chord patch. I'm actually going to duplicate the Diva here. Pull this up here just so we have the original patch as well. Now go back in here, remove every bottom two. Sounds the same. Maybe slight differences, but pretty much the same. Now, I'm gonna go to this layer. I'm just gonna use presets for now. I'm just gonna find presets that have some sort of drastically different character from each other. I like that, actually. Should have a little bit more reverb, though, so let's put it into a plate reverb. Pull this back a little bit. Let's go to this layer now. Let's change the preset. Again, I want something that's really different. Let's go back to this one. Now let's find something that could be a nice low bassy layer. Ooh, I like that. So now I took a chord progression and I've made a lot of different melodic lines here, technically. I could even start orchestrating this. So let's take this, or composing in a sense. I would consider this technically a form of arrangement, not necessarily orchestration or composition. This is just taking the musical information and just sort of recontextualizing it with different rhythms, adding different rhythms, or excuse me, adding different melodies and stuff like that. But like, let's take this and do a da 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 da, and then do the same thing here with da 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 kind of thing. Da 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 da, and then do the same thing here, cause fuck it, I'm lazy. Actually, I'm gonna do it the other direction. We're gonna be quirky, and we're gonna have it go ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da. Oops. Ba-da, ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da. And then this is just gonna go back to normal. Where this comes here. Da 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 da. Same information. And then maybe this can have an arpeggiator on it right here. Copy this one down, or maybe, yeah, copy this one down an octave, maybe? Even bring back in the original chords. These chords, they don't really matter. They can just be like extra texture, because the chords, fuck chords. Who cares? Just come up with the start of a song, basically, right? And remember, this is just meant from orchestration and arrangement. I haven't written music, okay? I want to be clear about this. The music I wrote was this. I did not do anything but change the rhythms, the sounds, and the texture and the placement of these notes. I didn't even add new notes. I could have added new notes. I could start writing melodies here, like have this come down, have this come down here, have this come climb back up. And this is totally fine in the context of orchestration and arrangement. And then like that. So, don't feel like you have to keep MIDI exactly the same when you are orchestrating out different layers for your sounds. The melody can become more expressive in a different instrument if that new layer is more agile. If you have the same chord pattern playing in the left and right ear, for example, maybe the one on the left has a different rhythm than the one on the right. Maybe there's different embellishments on those two different ideas. And I find that like this leads to more expressive differences. And again, if I listen to all of these layers on their own, very different texturally from each other. I can clearly delineate what is what in the mix just based on that. And that's part of the arrangement is mixing, orchestration is mixing, because none of these sounds are competing with each other in not just their EQ position, how I'm processing them. I haven't done any EQing here. You can hear everything because they're all doing different things. They're existing in different frequency domains. They have different harmonic spectrum. Before you had an EQ and you were like Mozart or fucking Brahms or fucking Mahler or whatever, all you had was dynamics and articulation and octave. That's the way you compose your music. It's like, well, I need to make space for this. I better remove this instrument. But let's actually get into the very, very last thing for this, which would be processing as a sound design tool, right? So let's go back into my sample pack, and I'm just going to grab a vocal loop. So this has a little bit of processing already on it, not a ton. Let's set this to 105 just so it fits. Now, how would I make this bigger? Without having the ability to change this sound. For example, I can't layer this unless I start recording new sounds or recording new MIDI and layering that in and matching the notes as I play them. It's harder to layer or orchestrate a loop in this way. So how would we process it? Well, one thing I can do is take something like Little Altar Boy and start spreading the sound. If it's a single pitch, you can sometimes start to harmonize. Otherwise, I would stick to very simple things. I would stick to octaves up or down, maybe -5, maybe +7, maybe. Let's try. Let's try -5. So this is the fifth underneath whatever pitch we're playing. Like you go up a perfect fifth and then drop it an octave. That's what we're doing here, or a fourth down. It's like you have G going up to C, but you're in the key of C minor or C major. So it's a different tone, but it's much warmer for me. Now, to make it go up more, I'm actually going to do this in separate racks, believe it or not. I'm going to now set this up because I am going to do this in separate effect racks, because I want to treat the different processing chains as their own layers. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to call this -5 pitch. I'm going to move this one up to the top and call this one dry. This is our starting sound, dry. I'm not going to put anything on here. Now I want to layer something else, but I have to choose, is it going to go onto the original vocal or onto a processed layer? I want to do an additional layer here. So I'm going to take this. This is just a grain delay. It's a preset I made that just sets it up an octave with a little bit of randomness on the pitch, a little bit of feedback, and it's a 1/8 delay. It has a little bit of fluttery to it from the feedback. If I increase this. But I don't want that. I just want a little bit of it. Now I want another layer to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a chorus to this layer. Make sure the dry wet's all the way up. Now if I just have this, I don't think it's what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to distort this until it gets kind of crunchy. And then I'm going to pull it down. So now it sounds crunchy and distorted and kind of bad, but this gets to what Avon was talking about. This sounds awkward on its own. I'm going to EQ it. I just want that. Notice how it loses, ever so subtly, a little bit of breathiness, a little bit of air that this adds on to the sound. This gives us a little bit of brittleness, a little bit of stereo, and a little bit of distortion only on those highest frequencies. So now each layer of processing, which is separate from one another, is contributing to this overall bigger sound that starts off with this. Just the normal vocal pad. It's nice and warm. Sounds pretty cool. Lower octave that feels nice and warm. Sparkly, glittery, cascadey, higher frequencies. Stereo, phasey kind of brightness that's just pushed back. I think I could even make this quieter. All of these add together to create the layers to this sound, the complexity in this one signal that you would then go in and tame back, you know? Cut out all the parts you don't need, compress it, do all that stuff, and turn that into your sound. You might want to blend these elements together, for example, with a little bit of reverb. This takes all those frequencies and adds another layer that's sort of like smearing them together with some gentle delays. Maybe you could also do a little bit of compression on the elements to kind of glue their waveforms together. Since this is gentle, I don't really want to go too much far over like 5 dB. I don't treat this like a hard thing. I'm mostly listening for how the sound catches, so to speak, on the loudest parts of the word. Focus in right there, right? Notice how when this is at -17, the oh has a consistent tone, but when I move this back up, you have that little pumping effect from everything kind of adding together. Now we can even adjust some of these layers. Like this can come back for sure. Yeah. That's a good sound. So much better than like this, right? Now this isn't bad. This is better. Clearly, all three of these things can work in tandem, right? You can take a sound, you can layer it with a bunch of different kind of parts, and then on those parts, you can layer those up, and then you can use that as one broader layer of a larger orchestration where all of those sounds on their own have a bunch of individual layers that add up to this greater whole. Those broader layers also on their own contribute to this greater orchestration of this musical idea. Kind of going back to this analogy I use a lot for like these Russian nesting dolls, where you have this small, tiny seed of an idea, and you just encase that in a slightly larger idea. And you encase that in a slightly larger idea. You encase that in a slightly larger idea. And you just keep adding on these layers and layers and layers until you have this big, giant, fucking 3-foot tall fucking Matryoshka doll that's fucking 40 pounds because there's 50 bajillion goddamn tiny little Russian nesting babushkas in there. And it's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with all these babushkas? And apparently what you do is you make a really cool track with it. You could also look at it in terms of your phrasing, in your song structure, where I have a 1-bar idea, and this is my question, right? Exactly. So this is going to be our question, right? And this is another thing with Lego. This Lego connects with this Lego. This question connects with this answer. Now you've made a larger idea. Let's duplicate that, or not duplicate that, but now let's look at this as one overarching question and answer, right? This is the first 4 bars of your song. Now, let's duplicate this, and we're going to start changing this thing now. So we have another layer of this, where we have a question. Whoops. Wrong one. A question moving to an answer. And do you see how this kind of looks like a Russian nesting doll now, as I keep duplicating these things over and over again, making changes to the second thing? And I mean, obviously, there's changes happening up here, clearly. Like, we are kind of growing in a way, but I'm just too lazy to change this. But now, again, we have one other layer of question and answer. And imagine if we duplicate that, and duplicate that. You know, we're getting a song, right? For me at least, with everything in music, it comes down to this like ever-expanding fractal, almost. And I think that's one of the reasons why fractals are so common in certain styles of music, because it represents this sort of ever-growing pattern of ideas that seed off of one another, and no matter how big you get, you can always go down one layer and look at the question, the answer, the pattern that emerges from that, the pattern that emerges from within that, and the pattern that emerges from within that.